Yeah, so sorry about the abrupt end of that last video again. It appears that I had a quick key combination bound in Cinema 4D that conflicts with the screencast software that I have, so every once in a while it just end up terminating the movie. But I fixed that, so I shouldn't have that glitch anymore, and so now we can move on without any premature stops in the presentation. So back to the moon. My goal here is that I want to get that moon to orbit the Earth. And if I select the Earth, there's a couple different ways that I can manage this. The Earth has a position relative to its parent object, which is at the center of our 3D space. Okay, so the Earth, this number on the x-coordinate is actually the center of Earth. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that number. That's going to be useful. I could jot it down, or I could just copy it. It's going to be a little bit quicker if I copy it. I'm going to select the moon. I could do this two different ways, but I think the easiest thing to do is just follow this same convention we've been using, which is selecting the moon. I'm going to Option G to group it, and I'll call this moon orbit. Moon orbit. With moon orbit selected, I'm going to make sure that I'm using the axis tool here, and I'm going to highlight the X position, which is 4,524 and some change, and I'm going to paste it with the coordinate system of the Earth that I've copied. And all that did is it's going to move the axis to the center of the Earth when I hit apply. I'm going to go back to using the model mode of this move tool, and now when I select the moon orbit, I'm just going to test this by selecting my rotation, and now I can rotate that around the Earth. Okay, so if I zoom in on the moon, I can select moon orbit and rotate, and that's going to rotate around Earth. Now if I rotate the moon and I select Earth orbit and I rotate that, you can see that they're all rotating together, so I can have independent rotation and orbits as we move forward. So I'll just undo that. I'll zoom back in. Now I could, because of this relationship, I could select the moon and have the moon rotate on its own axis as well, but the moon actually orbits in a way, it orbits the Earth, that we always see the same side of the moon, right? There's a dark side of the moon, and when we look up at the moon, we see the man on the moon, and that man doesn't change, right? There's always a dark side of the moon that we don't see. That's because the moon is in phase lock here with the Earth, which means that it rotates and orbits at the exact same rate. Now, I don't remember that from the last science class that I took. It just I can only recall that because I recently saw that mentioned on the History Channel here. So that's just you know, something that we're gonna run with here. We don't need to orbit the moon. Excuse me. We don't need to rotate the moon. We just want it to orbit. Now, I'm not going to cause the as I mentioned before, we're not going to model this thing to scale, and we're also not going to animate it to scale. So I'm not going to have my Earth orbit the sun in 365 keyframes or whatever we decide to do, and then distribute the scale of the orbits out throughout the planets. We're gonna create an Earth animation that orbits the sun, and then we'll establish some basic rules from there. But we'll cross that bridge a little bit later. The last thing that I want to do is I want to run through my hierarchy here and make sure that everything is kind of following the same conventions. And I will say that I've violated a major rule of mine. I've been working on this file for, I don't know, 20 minutes now, 15 minutes for sure, and I haven't saved it a single time. So I'm going to Command S to save, or File, Save, and I'm also going to choose File, Save, Incremental. So now I'm working on Solar System 02. It's saved in my project folder, and I'll continue to push this forward. I'm going to run through my hierarchy here, and I noticed that I didn't group Venus, so Venus's orbit is not going to work right now, so I'll Option G, and I'll call this Venus orbit. With that selected, I'll use the axis tool, the move axis, and I'll just set that X value to 0, and now I'll go back to the use model tool. And what I could do, like rigging any kind of animation, what I want to do is, I think I have the basics set up. I'm going to go to rotate, and I'm just going to test each one of these objects by rotating them around the y-axis, or the green axis band, or more appropriately the heading rotation. Okay, so I'm going to select Mercury, I'm going to give it a little rotation, It looks pretty good, so I'll Command Z to undo that. I'll go to Venus. I'll give that a quick rotation. That looks pretty good. I'll undo it, and I'll do Earth as well. And I'm pretty convinced everything is set up just the way that I want it. Okay. Now again, maybe you know, some things aren't distributed the way that I want them, but I can always tweak that a little bit later. I'm going to save this. I like the way that it's set up. I'm going to do immediate file save incremental, and I'm going to start applying some basic textures here. Now, as far as the textures go, I'm going to jump out here for a moment and close some of this stuff. I'm going to go into the 3D simulation, my class folder, into my project folder. I'm going to look at this texture folder. You'll notice that I have a couple of different textures in here. I have Mercury map. This will be the color map that I use for Mercury. I also have some bump files, and so if we find moon, let's look for moon in here. We have moon map, which is the color map, and then we have moon bump. So I'll apply those to a texture. I'll build a texture based on those two channels. And what I'll do is I'll quickly just build a map for Mercury, and then we'll jump out and do Earth and Moon, and we'll go back and catch some of those other maps along the way. So first thing I'll do is I'll select Mercury, the actual object itself, not its orbit. I'm going to tap the S key to zoom in, and I'm going to focus on the materials panel, and I'll just really quickly double click to build a material, and I'll call this Mercury. And I'm going to make sure that the color channel is selected, and rather than using a flat color, I'm going to load a texture. So I'm going to find the texture field. I'll click on the ellipsis next to it. I'll go into the texture folder, which is inside my project folder, and I'm looking for Mercury. Now, I don't want Mercury bump, I want Mercury map or Mercury color map. And I'll open that up. And so I start to get my Mercury texture here. I'm going to go find the bump channel. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to load into that channel. I'm going to load Mercury bump. And once I do that, you'll see that I start to get a little texture here. It might be kind of hard to see with this small little icon, so I'll right click on it and I'll blow that up to huge. And now when I toggle bump on and off, you'll start to see that, you know, it's revealing a little bit of texture on and off. Okay, now I could control the mix strength of that bump if I want to exaggerate it. We'll bump it way up, way too much texture. We'll take it back down to its default, and I'll tweak it a little bit later. I may want to turn specular off. I might not want such a hot spot on the planet, or maybe I just want to kind of mellow it out a little bit, so I can play with some of these values. I can round it off, or just kind of take it down a little bit. So I could play with the specular, or I could turn it off. We'll come back and feel our way through that. So I have a pretty simple Mercury texture built. I'll drag and drop that onto the Mercury object. Now I'll select the Earth object, or maybe I'll do Moon next. I'll select Moon, tap the S key, and build a quick Moon texture the same way. I'm just double clicking in the Material Manager to get a new texture, and then I'm double clicking on that texture. I'll call it Moon with the color channel selected. I'm going to load, not Mercury, Moon map. I'll say open. I'm going to go find the bump channel just like I did. I'll turn on bump, and I'll load moon bump. Okay, and remember, moon bump, or excuse me, any bump map, if I go look at moon bump, I'll just give that a double click. Just a reminder, a bump map is a black and white, or excuse me, a grayscale graphic that emulates texture on an object. So the darker the area of the bump map, the more it's going to recede from the surface of the model. The lighter the area is, the more it's going to move forward into the foreground of that surface model. So this is the bump map for the moon. And if I open the color map for the moon and put these side by side, you see that it kind of corresponds. This is the color of the moon here. This is the bump map. So anything that gets really dark here is gonna recess into space and emulate some of that crater information. And so, you know, we could build this manually on our own, but the goal of this project is not to spend too much time texturing. We want to tweak the textures once we get them. We want to focus on the animation, the composition, and the presentation of this animation. And so we'll catch up in the next presentation, and we'll build a material for our Earth object.